Before there was religion, there was fear. Long before the first church was built, before the first prayer was spoken, before the first holy book was written, there was a terrified animal sitting in the dark, staring up at a sky it could not understand, shaking. Lightning split the sky, and the animal did not know why. Someone it loved got sick and died, and there was no explanation. A volcano erupted and destroyed everything overnight. A drought came, and the food disappeared, and the children started dying, and nobody knew how to stop it. And that animal, which happened to be us, could not handle not knowing why. That inability to sit with not knowing, that desperate, almost physical need to have an explanation for what is happening, that is where God came from. Not from a revelation, not from a divine encounter in a burning bush or a mountaintop or a dream, from a brain that could not tolerate silence, from a species so frightened by the randomness of existence that it decided the randomness must mean something, that something must be in charge, that behind every disaster and every disease and every death and every unexplainable event, there must be a face, a will, an intention, a reason. And that decision, that specific, deeply human decision to put a face on the unknown rather than sit with the unknown as it actually is, that is the single most important thing that has ever happened in human history. Because everything that followed from it, every war fought in the name of God, every life shaped or broken by religion, every person who ever found genuine comfort in prayer or was controlled through fear of hell or died defending their particular version of the divine, all of it traces directly back to that single terrified moment in the dark when a frightened primate looked up at the sky and decided there must be someone up there. And I want to show you exactly how that happened. Not to attack your faith, not to tell you what you should or should not believe, but because understanding where God actually came from, really understanding it at the level of psychology and evolution and human need, changes the way you see almost everything about human civilization. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Everything referenced in this video is linked in the description below. Now, stay with me, because this is going to go somewhere most content refuses to follow. Let us start at the very beginning, not the religious beginning, the actual beginning. 50,000 years ago, give or take, a human being anatomically identical to you is sitting outside in the dark. This person has the same brain you have, the same capacity for thought, for feeling, for connection, for terror, but they have none of the tools you have. No science, no medicine, no understanding of how the physical world actually works at a mechanical level. They do not know that lightning is caused by electrical discharge between clouds and the ground. They do not know that disease is caused by microscopic organisms. They do not know that earthquakes happen because tectonic plates are moving. They do not know any of that. What they have is a brain. A very sophisticated, very powerful brain that evolved over millions of years to do one thing above all else: keep them alive. And the primary tool that brain uses to keep them alive is pattern recognition, the ability to notice connections between events. If I eat that plant, I get sick. If I go near that territory, those animals attack. If I make this sound, the other members of my group understand I need help. Pattern recognition is survival. It is the single most important cognitive tool a human being has. But here's the problem with a brain wired to find patterns. It doesn't stop looking for patterns just because there are none. When something happens that has no visible cause, when the lightning strikes and the crops die and the child gets sick with no apparent reason, that pattern-seeking brain doesn't conclude there is no cause. It cannot conclude that. Because in the environment where that brain evolved, the absence of a visible cause usually meant there was a hidden cause, a predator you hadn't spotted yet, a poison you hadn't identified yet, a threat you hadn't recognized yet. So the brain keeps looking, and what it finds almost every single time across almost every culture in human history without exception is a will, an intention, a person, a mind behind the event. Because the human brain evolved in a social environment, and it is extraordinarily good at one specific type of pattern above all others: detecting minds, detecting intentions, reading faces and motivations and plans. We are the most socially sophisticated species that has ever existed, and that sophistication comes from our ability to model other minds, to guess what other people are thinking and wanting and planning. And when the unknown confronts us, when something happens that has no visible mechanical explanation, our mind does what it always does. It tries to read the intention behind the event. It asks not what caused this, but who caused this. And the answer it produces is God. This is not stupidity. This is not primitive thinking that we have somehow moved beyond. This is the brain doing exactly what it was built to do and applying that capability to a situation where it does not actually apply. It's finding a mind where there is no mind, finding an intention where there is only physics. And that mistake, that specific, deeply human, almost impossible to avoid mistake, is the seed from which every religion that has ever existed on this planet grew. Now, I want to show you something that is one of the most remarkable facts in all of human history, and that almost never gets discussed directly, because its implications are so uncomfortable. Every single civilization in human history invented gods. Everyone, without a single exception. Completely isolated from each other, separated by oceans and mountain ranges and thousands of years and thousands of miles, human cultures around the world independently arrived at the exact same conclusion. There are powerful beings controlling what we cannot control. There are invisible forces behind the visible world. There are gods. The ancient Egyptians had them and built monuments to them that still stand today. The ancient Greeks had them and wrote stories about them that are still read 3,000 years later. The Romans had them, the Norse had them, the Aztecs had them, the Incas had them, the ancient Chinese had them, the Mesopotamians had them, the people of ancient India had them, the indigenous peoples of every continent, every island, every isolated valley on Earth had them. Not some of them, all of them. Every human culture we have ever discovered or studied, without a single exception, invented some form of supernatural belief. And that universality is not evidence that the supernatural beliefs are true. It is evidence that the need to create them is built into the human brain itself. It is a feature of human cognition, not a discovery about reality. And when you look at all of those gods together, when you put them side by side and examine them honestly, something extraordinary becomes visible. They all look like the people who created them, not approximately, precisely. Violent civilizations created violent gods who demanded blood sacrifice and celebrated military victory. Civilizations living in desert environments where rain was the difference between life and death created gods who controlled weather and had to be appeased with ritual to bring the harvest. Civilizations built around patriarchal family structures created male gods who were fathers and kings and judges. Civilizations in which the political ruler was the most powerful person alive created gods who looked exactly like political rulers, but with infinite power and infinite duration. The ancient Greeks, who lived in a society where powerful people had love affairs and political rivalries and petty jealousies and family disputes, created gods who had all of those things, but with supernatural power. Zeus cheated on his wife, Hera was jealous, Ares loved war, Aphrodite manipulated people with desire. They were basically very powerful, very dysfunctional Greek aristocrats who happened to live on a mountain and control the weather. The Hebrew God of the Old Testament was a God who made legal covenants and demanded specific behaviors and punished violations and rewarded loyalty, because the culture that produced those texts was a culture organized around law and covenant and the very specific relationship between a ruler and a subject. The gods of every culture are reflections of the deepest values and the deepest fears and the deepest social structures of the cultures that created them. They are not discoveries, they are projections. We took everything that mattered most to us, everything we feared, everything we hoped for, everything we valued, and we projected it onto the sky and called what we saw divine. And then, crucially, we forgot that we had done the projecting. We started to believe the projection was the reality. And that forgetting is where religion truly begins. Nietzsche understood this with a clarity that was so complete and so direct that it made him genuinely dangerous to the established order of his time. He was not simply an atheist, he was something more specific and more interesting than that. He was someone who looked at the entire architecture of religious belief and traced every element of it back to its human psychological origin. He saw that religion, and specifically Christianity in the European context he knew best, had been constructed to serve a specific set of psychological and social functions. And once you could see those functions clearly, you could see the construction itself. You could see the seams. He observed that the specific moral values promoted by Christianity, meekness, humility, self-sacrifice, turning the other cheek, the blessedness of poverty, the virtue of suffering, these were not values that emerged from some neutral reading of human nature. They were values that emerged from a specific historical situation, the situation of a conquered, oppressed, largely poor population living under the power of Rome. And they were values that made that situation not just bearable, but spiritually superior. If you cannot win in the physical world, you redefine winning. The meek will inherit the earth, the last shall be first. The rich man cannot enter heaven, but the poor man can. Suffering is not just endured, it is sanctified. The powerless are not just surviving, they are accumulating spiritual credit that will be paid out in eternity. He called this slave morality. And he was not using the word slave as an insult, he was using it as a description. The morality of people who have no power in the current arrangement and who have therefore reframed the current arrangement so that their lack of power becomes a spiritual virtue. And he pointed out that this reframing requires a God who endorses it, who validates the suffering, who promises the reversal, who tells the oppressed that their oppression has meaning and that the people oppressing them will pay for it eventually. God, in this reading, is not a discovery about the nature of reality. God is a psychological technology developed to make unbearable situations bearable. And the specific form God takes in any given culture is shaped by the specific psychological needs of the people in that culture at that moment in history, which is exactly what you would expect if God is a human creation, and exactly what you would not expect if God is a real being who revealed himself independently to different cultures. Because a real being revealing himself would presumably reveal something consistent, something that did not happen to perfectly mirror the social structures and psychological needs of each particular group of people who encountered him. But here is the argument that I think is the most powerful and the most difficult to dismiss, the argument from death. And I want to spend real time on this because I think it is the key to understanding not just where God came from, but why God is so persistent. Why even people who intellectually concluded that God probably does not exist continue to feel the pull of religious belief. The answer is death, specifically the terror of it, the specific, uniquely human terror of knowing that you are going to die and not being able to accept it. Every other animal on Earth dies without knowing in advance that it will die. The deer grazing in the field does not lie awake at night thinking about the fact that it is going to be dead someday. The fish in the ocean does not feel existential dread when it thinks about its own mortality. They do not think about their own mortality. They cannot. They do not have the cognitive architecture for it. Only we do. Only the human being has the specific combination of self-awareness and forward-projecting imagination that allows it to know years or decades in advance that it is going to die. And that knowledge, which is one of the most extraordinary things about human consciousness, is also one of the most destabilizing. Because once you know you are going to die, everything changes. Every plan you make is made in the shadow of that knowledge. Every relationship you form exists against the backdrop of eventual loss. Every achievement you reach for will eventually be irrelevant because you and everyone who knew about it will be gone. The universe is approximately 14 billion years old. The Earth will exist for another 4 or 5 billion years before the sun destroys it. And in that context, a human life of 70 or 80 or 90 years is so brief it does not even register as a rounding error. And knowing that, feeling that, living with that awareness every day without being able to turn it off, that is one of the hardest things a conscious creature can do. Ernest Becker, in his book The Denial of Death, which is one of the most important books written in the 20th century and which is linked in the description below, argued that this terror is the central fact of human psychology, that the awareness of death is so overwhelming, so incompatible with the ordinary functioning of a human life, that every human culture in history has developed elaborate systems to manage it, to deny it, to make it somehow less than it is. And religion is the most powerful and most complete death denial system that humanity has ever produced. Because religion does not just help you cope with the fear of death, it eliminates it. It says you will not actually die. The part of you that matters, the soul, the consciousness, the essential self, that continues in heaven, in paradise, in another life, in union with God. The specific form of the promise varies, but the core is always the same. You are not going to be erased. Death is not the end. And if you understand how desperate the human need is to believe that, if you really feel the weight of what it means to know you are mortal and to be unable to accept it, then you understand why that promise has been one of the most powerful forces in human history, and you understand why it will not go away simply because the intellectual arguments against it are strong. Because the need it is answering is not intellectual, it is existential. It is baked into the structure of being a self-aware creature in a universe that does not care whether you continue to exist. Now let me show you something about religious belief that is simultaneously one of the most obvious things in the world and one of the things that almost never gets said directly in polite conversation. Every religious person on Earth is almost completely an atheist. Think carefully about what I mean. Over the course of human history, thousands of distinct gods have been worshipped by millions or billions of people who believed them with complete sincerity and complete certainty. Zeus, Odin, Ra, Osiris, Vishnu, Shiva, Quetzalcoatl, Marduk, Baal, Ares, Poseidon, Tlaloc, Ahura Mazda, Enlil, Anu, Thor, Freya, Horus, Anubis, Dionysus, Apollo, Artemis, Athena, thousands more whose names we do not even know because their worshippers are gone. Each of these gods was worshipped by people who believed just as sincerely and just as completely as any modern Christian or Muslim or Hindu believes today, who prayed to them and built temples for them and sacrificed for them and organized their entire lives around them. And every modern religious person looks at every single one of those gods and sees exactly the same thing, a human invention, a story that primitive people told because they didn't know any better, a projection of human fears and hopes onto the sky, a myth. Not one modern religious believer on Earth thinks Zeus was real. Not one thinks Odin was real. Not one thinks Ra was real. Every single one of those gods has been dismissed by every modern religious person as obviously a human creation. And then that same person turns around and believes with complete certainty in their own God, the one they were born into, the one their parents taught them, the one their community practices, and they apply to that God none of the skepticism they apply to every other God on the list, because that God is different. That God is not mythology. That God is real. And if you ask them how they know, the answer is always some version of the same thing. I feel it, I have experienced it, my community practices it, my sacred text describes it. It has been true for my people for thousands of years. And here's the problem. Every single one of those answers, every single one, was also given by the people who worshipped Zeus and Odin and Ra. They felt it too. They experienced it too. Their communities practiced it too. Their sacred texts described it too. It had been true for their people for thousands of years too. The subjective experience of religious certainty is not evidence for the truth of the specific religion producing it, because it is identical across all of them, which means either all of them are correct, which is impossible because they contradict each other, or none of the subjective experiences are reliable evidence of objective truth. And if the subjective experience is not reliable evidence, then the only thing distinguishing the one God the modern believer accepts from the thousands of gods they reject is familiarity, personal connection, cultural inheritance, the fact that this one was given to them before they were old enough to evaluate it. That is the honest account of religious certainty, and it should be uncomfortable. Not because it means God doesn't exist, but because it means the feeling of certainty about which God is real is not a reliable guide to which God is real. If it were, there would be thousands of incompatible religions, each generating the same feeling in their adherents.
Here's the thing about morality that almost nobody says directly in conversations about religion. If you need God to tell you not to hurt people, the problem is not the absence of God. The problem is the absence of empathy. Because morality does not originate in divine commandments, it originates in the capacity to recognize that other beings can suffer, that their pain is as real as yours, that causing unnecessary suffering to a creature capable of experiencing it is wrong not because someone told you it is wrong, but because when you actually pay attention to what suffering is and what it does to the being experiencing it, it is obviously wrong. A person who does not torture children because God told them not to is not moral, they are obedient. And obedience and morality are completely different things. Obedience is what a dog does when it is trained not to bite. Obedience is what a prisoner does when they follow the rules to avoid punishment. Obedience is what a child does when they behave well because they are afraid of being hit. None of that is morality. Morality requires something the dog and the prisoner and the frightened child may not have. the genuine recognition that the being in front of you has an interior life, that they feel, that they suffer, that what you do to them matters not because you will be punished for it, but because it matters to them. That is the actual foundation of ethics, not commandments from above, consciousness of others below. And if you have that, you do not need God to tell you that cruelty is wrong. And if you do not have that, God telling you does not actually give it to you. It just gives you a rule to follow, which works until the rule has a loophole, or until the authority enforcing the rule is not watching, or until someone convinces you that the people you are about to harm are not really people in the way that counts. Every atrocity in human history has been committed by people who had commandments against it. The commandments did not stop them because the commandments were never doing the real moral work. The empathy was supposed to be doing the real moral work, and when the empathy was not there, the commandments were just words. This does not mean religion has no role in moral life. It clearly does. Religious communities have produced enormous amounts of human good. They have organized charity and care and mutual support on a scale that secular institutions rarely match. They have given people moral frameworks that help them resist their worst impulses and act on their better ones. That is real and it matters, and an honest accounting has to include it. But the source of that good is not the supernatural claims at the center of the religion. The source is the community, the accountability, the shared values, the practice of thinking about how to treat other people as a regular, deliberate activity. And those things can exist without the supernatural claims. They are human goods that the religious container happens to hold. They are not produced by the religion itself. The historical record of organized religion is not clean, and this needs to be said directly rather than avoided. The same institutions that provided comfort and community and moral guidance to billions of people also provided theological justification for some of the worst things human beings have ever done to each other. The Inquisition did not happen because a few bad people hijacked a good religion. It happened because when you follow certain theological premises to their logical conclusions, you arrive at the Inquisition. If you genuinely believe that the eternal soul of a person who dies with incorrect beliefs will suffer forever in hell, then causing that person temporary physical pain to correct their beliefs is not cruelty, it is mercy. The torturers of the Inquisition were not misunderstanding their religion, they were following it with a terrible consistency. The religious justification for slavery in the Americas was not a distortion of Christianity. It was Christianity applied to a situation by people who read the same texts, prayed to the same God, and arrived at the conclusion that the institution of slavery was divinely sanctioned. The religious wars that killed millions of Europeans over which version of Christianity was correct were not a failure of religion. They were religion operating according to its internal logic. When you believe you have access to absolute truth and that those who disagree are rejecting God himself, violence against them becomes not just permissible, but potentially obligatory. The violence follows from the certainty, and the certainty is built into the structure of revealed religion, into the claim that one particular set of texts or one particular tradition has received direct communication from the creator of the universe and that everyone else has not. That claim, taken seriously, produces exactly the kind of tribal exclusivity and willingness to harm outsiders that we see throughout religious history. And the people today who practice those same religions and are gentle and kind and morally thoughtful and would never dream of harming anyone in the name of their faith are not following their tradition consistently. They are softening it with their own moral intuitions, with the empathy and the basic human decency that exists independent of any text. They are, in the most important sense, better than their religion tells them to be. And that is worth acknowledging, not as an insult, but as a recognition of where the actual moral goodness is coming from. It is coming from them, from the human capacity for empathy and care that they brought to the religion, not the religion itself.
Now, I want to spend time on something that most atheist arguments skip entirely. Because the critique of religion, pointing out the logical problems and the historical record and the psychological origins, that part is relatively easy once you've decided to look honestly. What is harder, and what I think is actually more important, is understanding what religion was doing for people, what needs it was answering, what it replaced, and what it provided that nothing else was providing. Because here is the truth about the universe that makes religious belief completely understandable, even if it is not literally true. The universe is cold, structurally indifferent to human welfare. A child dies of leukemia while a violent criminal lives to 90. A tsunami kills 200,000 people in a single morning for no reason related to anything any of them did or did not do. A person who has been kind and careful and generous their entire life gets a diagnosis at 50 that takes everything away in 18 months. The cosmos has no moral logic, no complaints department, no appeals process, no guarantee that good things happen to good people, or that suffering serves any purpose, or that the arc of any individual life bends toward justice. It just happens, randomly, without narrative logic, without the basic fairness that every human being, from the moment they develop enough consciousness to notice injustice, seems to expect from the world. And religion addressed that. Religion said, yes, the world looks unfair and random and brutal, but that is because you're seeing it from too limited a vantage point. There is moral order. It is just operating on a scale and a time scale you cannot see from where you are standing. The bad person will face consequences. The good person will be rewarded. The suffering means something. The story makes sense from above, even when it does not make sense from below. And in the next life, or in eternity, or in the fullness of divine time, everything will be set right. That story is one of the most powerful psychological things ever told. And it is powerful not because it is true, but because it is exactly what a frightened, mortal, justice-seeking creature needs to hear in order to keep functioning in a world that does not, in fact, operate according to justice. Freud saw this clearly. He described God as the exalted Father, the cosmic parent who is infinitely more capable and powerful and wise than any actual parent, who sees everything and knows everything and will ultimately make everything okay. The child who is frightened looks for the parent. The adult who is frightened and has no adequate parent looks upward and finds God there, or rather projects God there, because the need for something to be there is so strong that the mind fills the space whether anything is actually there or not. Marx saw it from a political angle. He famously described religion as the opium of the people, which is almost always quoted as pure mockery, but the full context is more compassionate than that. He called religion the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world. He was saying that religion arises because the world is genuinely hard and genuinely unjust for many people, and those people need something to get through it. The consolations of religion are real consolations for real suffering. The problem he identified is that by directing suffering upward towards supernatural resolution, religion reduces the pressure for downward political resolution. If your pain will be redeemed in heaven, you are less likely to demand that it be addressed on earth. The comfort is real. The cost of the comfort is also real. Science has made things simpler in this regard. In many ways, it has made them harder, because science has systematically removed God from every domain where God used to provide explanation. Lightning is not divine anger, it is electrical discharge. Disease is not divine punishment, it is bacterial or viral infection. Mental illness is not demonic possession, it is neurological and psychological disorder. The diversity of life is not divine creation, it is the product of billions of years of evolution by natural selection. The universe itself did not begin because God spoke. It began, as best as current physics can determine, with a quantum event approximately 14 billion years ago that produced the conditions for everything that followed. Every place where God used to stand as an explanation, science has placed a mechanism, a material cause, a physical process that operates according to discoverable laws without requiring any supernatural intervention. And in one sense, this is an extraordinary triumph. It has given us medicine and technology and the ability to predict and control aspects of the natural world in ways that would have seemed miraculous to any previous generation. But in another sense, it has produced a specific kind of homelessness, because the God who has been pushed out of the domain of physical explanation was also the God who provided meaning, who provided the sense that your individual existence mattered, who provided the promise that death was not the end, who provided the assurance that the suffering of the innocent meant something. Science replaced the explanatory function of God with much more accurate explanations. It did not replace the meaning function. And the meaning function was the one that actually kept people going. This is the crisis that Nietzsche was pointing at when he declared the death of God. He was not celebrating, he was warning. He saw that European civilization had built its entire moral and meaning-making infrastructure on a theological foundation, and that once the intellectual class stopped genuinely believing that foundation was true, the infrastructure would start to collapse. Not immediately. The habits and values that had been formed under the religious framework would persist for a while through cultural momentum, but eventually, without the foundation, the walls would crack.
And what would fill the space left by the collapse of the religious framework was the question he was asking. He worried it would be nihilism, the belief that nothing matters, the paralysis of a consciousness that knows it is temporary and can find no adequate reason to prefer anything over anything else. And looking at the modern world, at the epidemic of meaninglessness and the hunger for something to believe in, and the way that hunger keeps producing new political and ideological religions to fill the space that traditional religion left, it's hard to say he was wrong to worry. Because here is what the evidence actually shows when you look at it without filtering it through a preferred conclusion. Countries and communities that have moved away from religious belief have not, on average, become more nihilistic or more violent or more selfish. The most secular countries in the world, the Scandinavian nations, consistently rank among the highest in measures of human well-being, social trust, low corruption, generosity, and quality of life. They have found ways to provide community and meaning and moral structure without requiring supernatural belief as the foundation, which suggests that the functions religion serves, community, shared values, regular reflection on how to treat other people, a sense of connection to something larger than yourself, can be provided by other means. The container can be secular. The contents do not have to be supernatural. But it is also true that those countries are exceptional, that for billions of people around the world, and particularly for people in circumstances of genuine hardship and genuine uncertainty, religion is not a luxury or a habit or a cultural artifact. It is the thing that makes the next day possible, the thing that gives a grieving mother a reason to keep going when her child has died, the thing that gives a person facing a terminal diagnosis a way to face it without total psychological collapse, the thing that holds a community together when everything external has failed. And dismissing that, treating it as simply an error that needs to be corrected, is not honest. It is a kind of intellectual arrogance that ignores the actual texture of human experience. The question is not whether the beliefs are literally true. The question is whether the lives of the people holding those beliefs are better or worse for holding them. And the honest answer is that for many people, in many circumstances, they are better. Not because the beliefs are accurate, but because the human being is not simply a logic machine that needs accurate information to function. The human being is a meaning-seeking, community-needing, death-fearing creature that requires certain things to function well that have nothing to do with literal accuracy. And religion has been providing those things for the entire duration of human civilization. That is not nothing. That is one of the most significant facts about our species. So where does this leave us? Right here, at the end of a video that has traced the origin of God from the terrified animal in the dark to Nietzsche's warning about what happens when the story stops working. What is the honest conclusion? I do not think the honest conclusion is that religion is simply an error and everyone who believes is simply mistaken, and the sooner we all become atheists, the better. That is too simple, and it ignores too much. The honest conclusion is more uncomfortable than that. It is that God is a human creation, not in the sense of a lie or a fraud, in the sense of something that arose organically from the deepest features of human psychology, from the brain that cannot stop looking for minds, from the consciousness that cannot accept its own ending, from the social creature that needs to belong to something larger than itself, from the justice-seeking animal that cannot live in a world that has no moral order without inventing one. God is the most elaborate and the most enduring thing humanity has ever built, and it was built to solve a set of problems that are real and permanent and not going away. The problem of death, the problem of meaning, the problem of suffering without explanation, the problem of community and belonging and shared values. Those problems are still here. They will always be here. They are part of what it means to be a conscious, mortal creature in an indifferent universe. And the question of what answers them, now that the traditional answer has become, for a growing portion of humanity, impossible to believe literally, is not a trivial question. It is possibly the most important question of our time, and it does not have a clean answer yet. What I know is that the answer is not going back. The kind of unreflective, inherited, unexamined faith that was possible in previous centuries is not possible in the same way for a person who has access to the full sweep of human knowledge about the universe and about the history of religion and about the psychology of belief. The story cannot be unread, but the needs the story was answering are still there, and they are real, and they are human, and they deserve something better than either a faith that cannot be believed or a void that cannot be inhabited. The frightened animal that looked up at the dark sky and invented God was not stupid. It was doing the best it could with what it had. We are doing the same. The question is whether we can do it more honestly. One last thing before you go. This channel exists because there are questions that deserve to be asked directly and followed wherever they lead without stopping for comfort. But there's a limit to how far this format can go. YouTube has a ceiling, an algorithm that needs content to reach a broad enough audience to recommend it. And because of that ceiling, there are videos that will never exist here. Conversations that go further than this platform allows. Topics that require a room where nobody is optimizing for reach or softening the edge to protect the view count. Those conversations exist somewhere else, a private space linked in the description where we post what cannot be posted here, where the conversation about God and fear and death and meaning and the questions that have no comfortable answers goes to the places that YouTube simply will not follow. If you finished this video and felt like you were only just getting started, if you felt like the real conversation was somewhere deeper than what this format allows, that's where it continues. No algorithm, no ceiling, no softening. The link is in the description. It is there for the people who are ready for it.